Well, hey everybody, my name is Kent. I'm lead pastor here at Epic. Everybody at all of our locations in and around the city, do me a favor, put your hands together, help me welcome everybody who's with us today. Love you guys. So glad you are at church today. It's going to be a good one. Excited about it. Hey, want to start with a question. Here it is. Who or what is always on your mind? Who or what is always on your mind? Take a second, think about it. Who or what is always on your mind? Now, this is a really important question because you can tell a lot about a person by what's always on their mind. I know some people for whom work is always on their mind, like they're never able to really shut it off or clock out. They're always checking their mail all the time, you know what I'm saying? Trying to keep tabs on what's happening. It's the first thing they do in the morning, and it's the last thing they do at night. And the idea of not having Wi-Fi makes them hyperventilate, you know what I'm saying? So there's some people, work is just always on their mind. I know other people for whom whoever they're dating at the moment is always on their mind. My boo is always on my mind, right? That's the thing they're thinking about all the time. I remember when you first fell in love. Remember how hard it was to get anything else done because you had some cute little thing always on your mind, right? That's how that plays out. You couldn't even sleep well because you had some cute little thing always on your mind. When my wife Tiff and I were dating, we used to stay up real late out on the phone talking, and we'd stay up till 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. One time we did this on a Saturday, and then Sunday morning I went to church, and I fell asleep during the sermon on the front row, and I started snoring, and I was the worship pastor. And my pastor had to stop in the middle of his sermon. He was like, "Kent, wake up." And I was like, you ever wake up and immediately know that you're fired? Anybody have that experience? That's what happened to me. Not a good situation, not cool at all. And it all happened because I wasn't sleeping right because I had some cute little thing who was always on my mind. I know other people for whom the weekend is always on their mind. These are the people who can't make it to Wednesday without talking about what's going to happen on Friday, right? You know who you are. Where you at? Where you at? Yeah, you have issues. Okay, so yeah, that's a thing. Always excited about Friday or Friday. I don't even know why that's a thing, but there's that. Always have the weekend on their mind. It's true. You can tell a lot about a person by what's always on their mind. In fact, I think that you can tell what matters most to a person by what's always on their mind. Now, wouldn't it be fun if I could just point to somebody here in this auditorium or point to somebody at one of our other locations this morning, and then whatever it is that's going on in their brain, whatever they're thinking, wouldn't it be cool if that just popped up on the screen for everybody to see? Like, wouldn't that be fun? Some of you are like, no, that would not be fun. That is a terrible idea. Like, all the teenage boys are a little anxious right now. They're like, oh, we don't have that technology, do we? No, we don't have that technology. It is okay. In fact, if you think about it, the only person that it would ever be safe to do that with would be Jesus. Like, he's the only one it'd be safe to hear and see his thoughts. And if we did that, I think you actually might be surprised about what would show up on the screen if we were able to hear and see Jesus' thoughts. I don't think they would be about work. I don't think they would be about his boo. I don't think they'd be about what's going to happen on Friday. It would simply be about people. People were always on his mind. Like all kinds of people. Young people, old people, white people, black people, brown people, rich people, poor people, big people, little people, famous people, forgotten people. People were just always on his mind. Like never has anyone in all of history been more preoccupied with people than Jesus was. Whenever he got some fishermen to follow him, the first thing he told them was that from this day forward, I'm going to teach you how to fish for people. There's nothing wrong with a fishing business or construction or real estate or any other kind of business, but Jesus says, hey, if you're going to follow me, then you're going to need to learn how to be in the people business. Every time the disciples would put something else in front of the priority of people, Jesus was always the first one to push back and be like, whoa, 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 whoa. Remember, this is all about people. It's about serving people and caring for people and restoring people and loving people. Now get your priorities right and make sure that you put people first. Like even whenever they nailed him to the cross, Jesus prayed for those with the hammers in their hands. He even had those people on his mind. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And then just before he took his last dying breath, he took time for One more person. It was the thief who was on the cross beside him. He looked over, he turns to him and assures him that his sins are forgiven and that today he'd be with him in heaven. Like even in his dying moments, people were always on his mind. Why is that? Like why is it that in the midst of what at times were unbearable circumstances, why is it that Jesus almost exclusively had people on his mind? Like with all he had going on, with all he had to be concerned about, why is it that people were always on his mind? I think it's because Jesus, more than anyone else, knew God's heart. See, he knew the thing that God's heart beat fastest for. And he just decided, you know what, if that's what makes God's heart beats fast, then that's what's going to make my heart beat fast. And if that's the thing that God cares about, then that's the thing that I'm going to care about. And if that's the thing that God makes a priority, then that's the thing that I'm going to make a priority. And gang, if people is what matters most to God, and if people is what matters most to Jesus, then I think people is what should matter most to us. In Luke chapter 15, Jesus is actually confronted by a bunch of religious people, and they have a problem with his perspective about all this. They have a problem with his priorities whenever it comes to all this. And in response, he tells them 3 quick stories to try and show them why he did what he did and explain who and what really matters to him the most. And so I just want to talk you through this passage of scripture this morning, and we'll make some observations along the way. All right, so Luke chapter 15, starting in verse number 1. Here's what it says. It says, "Now the tax collectors and sinners were all gathered around to hear Jesus. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law," these are those religious people, "they muttered, 'This man welcomes sinners and he eats with them.'" Now, something you need to know about Jesus. He loved being around people who are nothing like him. Like here he is, the most righteous, holy, godly person on the planet, and he's hanging out with a group of people that were none of those things, like not even a little bit. And these religious people have a problem with that. And they're asking questions like, does he realize who those people are? Like, does he realize what they've done or where they've been? Does he realize, like, how they make their money? Does he really even know who he's talking to? Yes. Jesus knew exactly who he was talking to. And what I love about that is that even though they were nothing like him, he still wanted to be around them. And they still wanted to be around him too. I love that they weren't intimidated by Jesus. They weren't put off by Jesus. They weren't embarrassed by Jesus. No, they actually liked Jesus because they were valued by Jesus and respected by Jesus and loved by Jesus. And gang, if that's how Jesus made people feel, then I think that's how we should make people feel. And I think that's how people should feel when they walk through the doors of our church. Valued, respected, and loved. These people here that were confronting Jesus, they didn't get all that. And so Jesus launches into these 3 stories to try and explain why he did what he did and who and what matters to him the most. So here we go. Story number 1, verse 3 of Luke 15. It says, "Then Jesus told them this parable. Suppose one of you has 100 sheep and loses one of them. Doesn't he leave the 99 in the open country and go after the lost sheep until he finds it?" And everybody who's standing there listening to Jesus say this part of this story, they all start nodding their head. If you knew anything about keeping sheep, you knew, yes, like that's exactly what you would do. Like you would leave the 99 secure sheep and go find the one that's lost. You'd go get that one sheep. Now we listen to that, or we hear that, or we read that, and we think to ourselves, like, what's the big deal? You know what I'm saying? It's just one sheep. You know what I'm saying? Like, he's got 99 other sheep. Does he really have to go after the one sheep? And our issue is that we don't understand the value of that one sheep. That one sheep really mattered to that shepherd, right? For those of you who had kids, let me put it like this. This is that moment when you look up from what you're doing and you realize that you lost one of your kids. Anybody ever lost one of their children? Come on, be honest. I'm not the only one who has lost any of my children. Okay, yeah, all right, good. Couple honest people. So this is that moment. What happens in that moment? Like you are gripped with anxiety. There's a certain amount of just emotion, and you immediately spring into action, right? You don't sit back and be like, at least we're good. We still got his sister. Like you don't do that, No, you spring into action because every single kid matters. And all the sheep matter as well. This is a big deal, It's like whenever I have lost my kids on occasion. That has happened. I won't get into details because I don't want the police to be called, but that's definitely happened. But at least I was concerned about it, and I'm like, I don't want that to happen again. When I was a kid, my parents lost me 2-3 times a week. No big deal. It's kind of like, where's Kent? I don't know. He'll make it back tomorrow. It'll be okay. So, anyways. He goes on, verse 5. It says, and when he finds it, he joyfully puts it on his shoulders and goes home. And then he calls his neighbors together and says, rejoice with me. I've found my lost sheep. I tell you that in the same way, there will be more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner. And a sinner is just anybody who's ever sinned. So that would be all of us, all right? There's more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who do not need to repent. And no doubt when he tells this story, they're starting to try and figure out what exactly he's saying by all this. But before they can ask any questions, he launches into story number 2, verse 8. Or suppose a woman has 10 silver coins and she loses one. Doesn't she light a lamp, sweep the house, and search carefully until she finds it? Now, you might read that and think to yourself again, what's the big deal? She's got 10 coins, she loses one. So you got 10 dimes, you lose one dime. No big deal. But in this culture, it was a big deal because those 10 coins, they represented her value. They represented, in some ways, a dowry. It was like her status, her wealth. And in some ways, it represented her character, like her ability to be responsible with what she had. And so losing just one of those was a really big deal. In fact, losing one actually decreased your potential of getting married. Don't ask me to explain that. I don't quite understand it, but that was a thing. So you wanted all 10 of those coins, especially if you were trying to find a man. I'm just saying, all right? So you had to find your coin if you lost one. So everybody listening to Jesus tell the story is like, yeah, absolutely. She wouldn't leave the house until she found that lost coin. She'd look under every couch, every cushion, until she found that coin. Verse 9. And when she finds it, she calls her friends and neighbors together and she says, rejoice with me. I found my lost coin. In the same way, I tell you, there's rejoicing in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents. Now, at this point, they're starting to kind of really start to put some things together, but before they can ask some questions, again, Jesus launches into the next story number 3. Verse 11. Jesus continued, there was a man who had 2 sons. And we'll stop right there because this story is a little bit longer, and I'll just paraphrase what happens. I don't know if you're familiar with this story or not. It's the story of the prodigal son. That's what it's called. And what happens is this. There's a man who has 2 sons. And one day, the youngest son comes to his father and says, hey, I want my inheritance now, which was basically like him saying, Dad, I wish you were dead. I wish you were dead so I can go ahead and get what's coming to me. I'm sick of you. I'm sick of your rules. I'm sick of living in your house under your roof. Just give me what's mine so I can move on with my life. And this was not a good situation. But instead of getting angry, the father agrees to go ahead and give him his inheritance. And so the son takes his money and he leaves for the city. And when he gets to the city, he gets a condo and a car and a crowd of friends to help him spend all of his new money. And he's living it up, right? Some time goes by and he ends up losing it all. He loses all the money, loses the condo, loses the car, and eventually he loses the crowd that was there to help him spend all that money that he didn't have anymore. And now he finds himself at a place where he's just struggling. And he goes and he's in this really tough position, and all of a sudden he's out of money, out of food, out of luck, because now there's a famine in the land, right? Food is scarce. And he ends up taking this job, the only job he could get, and it was feeding pigs on a pig farm. Now that was really significant. When Jesus said this part of the story, everybody listening was like, oh, there was a gasp, because this was a Jewish young man. And pigs were considered unclean, and so they wouldn't eat anything from a pig, let alone touch a pig. And so this guy, he's takes this job where he's just trying to make some ends meet. He's feeding pigs in a pig farm. And Jesus says this part of the story, and all the Jewish people listening are like, oh my gosh, that's like the most shameful, most unclean, lowest possible job he could have ended up with. And so he's doing this job, and one day, The scripture actually tells us that he came to his senses. He has this moment where he stops and he looks around and he's like, how did I end up here? You ever had that moment where you just look around and go, how did I end up here? And it says that he thinks to himself, man, my dad has servants who work on his farm that are much better off than I am. Maybe, just maybe, I can go back to my father's house and not come back as a son. That ship has sailed. But maybe I could come back as just a hired servant. And maybe that could be my role. And it'd be better than staying right here where I am right now. And he finds himself at this really interesting spot in life where he's really missing home. But he also wonders if home is missing him. Can I go back? Will I be accepted back? I don't know. And so he starts working on his spiel. What's he going to say to his dad whenever he sees him? And he's working through that, and he's like, okay, I'm going to say, Dad, I'm sorry for what I've done. I was foolish. I lost everything that you worked your whole life to give me. I'm sorry about that. I brought shame on our family. I disrespected you. He's thinking through what he's going to say. And it says this in verse 20. It says, he got up and he went to his father. He musters up the courage to walk toward home, not in hopes that he'd be received back as a son, but in hopes that he'd be received back just as a hired servant there on the farm. And then what happens next? It blows everyone's mind because no one saw it coming. It's like that scene in Sixth Sense where you realize, oh, that little kid sees dead people. You know what I'm saying? Like, major plot twist is going on right here. And if you're mad right now because I just ruined Sixth Sense for you, good. That movie's so old. You should have watched that thing a million times by now, all right? So, anyways, scripture goes on. He says this. It says, so he got up and he went to his father. And it says, but while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. Now, if I'm the dad and my son told me off, took his inheritance, just left me high and dry, and then squandered it all away, I'm not filled with compassion for him. I'm filled with something else for him. I don't know, anger, lots of sarcastic comments, like, looky who we have here. So now you got something to say. Last time we talked, I thought I was dead to you. You better speak up loud because dead people don't hear so good. But I'm not the dad. So that's not what happened. Here's what happened. Jesus said, when the father saw his son coming down the road, he was filled with compassion for him, forgiveness for him, acceptance for him, love for him. Like this son, he couldn't have earned it. He didn't deserve it. And when he least expected it, his father loved him. Can I stop right there? And can I just say this? Man, if you're a person who feels like you're far from God, can I go ahead and tell you what will happen the moment you finally stop and look in his direction? Can I tell you what he's going to feel towards you? It's not judgment. It's not condemnation. It's not anger. It's not hatred. You know what he'll feel towards you? Compassion, love, acceptance. That's what God will feel toward you. You say, well, no. Like, you don't know my story. Like, you don't know what I've done. You don't know where I've been. There's a lot of stuff in my past that I'm not proud of. And yeah, you know what? That's actually the point that Jesus is making. There was nothing he could have done to earn this. There was nothing he could have done to deserve this. No, it was the Father's undeserved love that was given to the Son. And that's the point that Jesus is making. He's saying, hey, this was the worst case scenario. It was as bad as it could possibly be. And there was nothing that son could have done to change the fact that his father still loved him. And gang, there is nothing that you have done, and there's nothing that you could do to change God's love for you. Nothing. This was as bad as it could get. And Scripture tells us that while the son was still a long way off, the father saw him, which meant that he was looking for him. And I don't know. I think we all know what it's like to feel like we're a long way off. Yeah? I think what we all need to be reminded of this morning is that the Father is looking. waiting. Can't wait for the moment to be brought back together. He goes on, it says he saw him when he was a long way off. And it says he ran to his son and he threw his arms around him. Right? Now, when the religious people heard this part of the story, they all went, "What? He touched him? He's unclean." Like he just spent time inside the pig pen. Like they can't, we don't even eat pork, let alone touch somebody who's touched. He's unclean. This is not a good situation. He touched him, and I love Jesus because I can just imagine Jesus kind of leaning in and saying, yeah, he ran to his son, he threw his arms around him, and looked at these religious people and say, and he kissed him too. And everybody's like, ooh. And so the son launches into his spiel. Father, I'm so sorry. I really messed up. I blew it. I lost everything. And the father cuts him off, and he says this. He says, quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fatted calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. And then he goes on and he says something really interesting. Here's what he says. He says, for this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. And so they began to celebrate. Now, I don't know about you, but I read that and I'm thinking to myself, what do you mean dead? He wasn't dead. Like at no point in this story did the son die. That didn't happen. And what do you mean lost? He wasn't lost. They knew exactly where he was. He was down at the Boom Boom Room on 2nd Street in Vegas. Like they knew where he was. What do you mean he was lost? You're right. He didn't die and he wasn't lost. But the relationship that he had with his father was dead. And the relationship that he had with his father was lost. That's the thing that died. That's the thing that was lost. But now, because he moved back in his father's direction, that thing that was dead, now it's alive. That thing that was lost, now it's been found. And that's the reason why they began to celebrate. That's the reason why they threw a party. See, here's the thing. Whenever God looks down into the world, he sees two categories of people: lost people and found people. And that's it. He doesn't see good people and bad people. He doesn't see important people and forgettable people. He doesn't even see religious people and non-religious people. Nope. Just lost people and found people. That's it. And so you know why Jesus had people almost always on his mind? You know why he did what he did? You know why he spent time with who he spent time with? You know why he prioritized who and what he prioritized? It's because more than anything else, Jesus wanted every single lost person to become a found person. He wanted every broken person to become a whole person. He wanted every hopeless person to become a hope-filled person. The reason why Jesus spent so much time with disconnected people was simply because they were disconnected. And the reason why Jesus spent so much time with people who were far from God was simply because they were far from God. And he doesn't want that for anybody. You know one of the things I love about God? We really matter to him. Like every single one of us, people really matter to God. It's crazy. We live in this world where our value is oftentimes it's based on like your last achievement, or your value is based on your trophies, or your value is based on who you slept with last, or your value is based on your physical looks and how that stacks up to somebody else. Or our value is based on the size of our bank account or our savings. Or our value is based on the number of likes we get on Instagram. And here's the thing. None of that is true. That couldn't be further from the truth. Do you know the value of a thing is determined by what someone is willing to pay in order to get it? And Jesus gave his life for you. So what does that say about your value? He gave everything for you. And if you were the only one, he would have done that. What does that say about your value. Man, it says everything because you matter. I don't know. And maybe no one's ever really made a fuss over you before, but you need to know that there's a God in heaven who knows your name and has great plans for your life, wants you to know him in a special way, wants to help lead your life toward all the things he always planned for you to experience. And that he's over the moon about you. Over the moon. No one else might be, but he absolutely is. Why? Because you matter. You matter to God. In fact, everybody does. Like, you've never locked eyes with someone who doesn't matter to God. Like, regardless of where they've been or what they've done, you've never locked eyes with somebody who doesn't matter to God. Every skin tone, every religion, every sexual orientation, every political affiliation, every socioeconomic status, heck, even every Cowboy fan matters to God. I mean, barely. But they do, kinda, maybe. I'm not exactly sure. That's such good preaching. So as I land the plane, I just want to talk to two groups of people real quick. First, I want to talk to those of you who would consider yourself followers of Jesus, right? To those of you that would consider yourself followers of Jesus, here's what I think we need to take away from today. To kind of introduce what we're going to be talking about over the next few weeks. If people matter this much to God, I think they should matter this much to us. In fact, I think Jesus looks at those of us who are already found, and I think he says there's no greater cause that you can give your one and only life to than helping lost people become found people. Your neighbors, your coworkers, your friends, your family, your community, they all matter because people matter to God. And so they should matter to us. Like, they should matter more to us than our achievements and our reputation and our money. They should matter more to us than what other people think about us or achieving our own things. People around us really matter to God, so they should really matter to us. Listen, here's the thing. The moment that you realize that people are God's greatest treasure, I think you wake up with a different agenda. I think you treat people differently. You give differently. You talk differently. You live differently because you realize that every single day of your life, God invites you to join him in doing what really matters most, helping people make a connection to him, because that's the thing that changes everything. I was watching the news last night, and the last story on the news was a story about a missing child. It was this teenager who's been missing for a few days. And I was thinking about that story in light of this particular talk. And what I thought about was this. It surprised me, like, how often I can hear a story of a missing child or something like that, or see something on the news, and watch it, and then roll right past it without feeling all that much emotion. Like, I mean, yes, there's part of me that's like, oh, that's terrible, but, and then on to the next thing. Like, it's interesting to me that I could just do that, you know? It's almost like it's commonplace. But then I thought, you know what would make it different? What if it was my kid? I've got 3 kids, Kaylee, Cohen, and Gabe. And just thinking, just the thought that one of them would go missing, oh. You know what I'd do? I'd leave my job, I'd cash in everything I've got, and I'd search high and low, day and night until I found them, or I'd die trying. Because that's my kid. And if it was your kid that went missing, you'd do the same thing. And I was thinking about that, and I realized, you know what? That's how God feels about all his lost children that are here on this planet who haven't made a connection with him yet. Man, it just aches his heart that he's not been able to, you know, that those people that are lost haven't been found. Oh, you kidding me? And think about this. Isn't it the most frustrating thing in the world when something that you value so much is lost, you're trying to find it, and then the people around you won't help you look? You know what I'm saying? Like, how frustrating would it be? It's like you can't find your kid, and you're telling other people, will you help? And they're like, nah. If we're followers of Jesus, then more and more so our heart should grow to be more like God's heart. And more so we should begin to see people the way that God sees people. And we should be praying, God, help me to see people the way you see people. And so here's what we're going to do over the next few weeks. We're going to go on this journey together where we ask God to help grow our hearts for the people around us. And I want you to do a couple of things. Number one, I want you to be here every week for the rest of this series because they build on each other along the way. Number two, I want you to, starting this Wednesday, I want you to join me in a 10-part devotional that we're going to send to you every other day, starting Wednesday. We're going to give you the weekends off, all right? So Wednesday, Friday, and then Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Join me for a 10-part devotional that's going to take us through the end of this series. It'll take you 5, maybe 10 minutes a day to do it. And together, here's what we're going to do. We're going to get better. And we're going to ask God to help grow our hearts. All right? So that'll be a good thing. So join me in that. And then here's the third thing I want to ask you to do. I want to ask you to simply pray that prayer. God, would you help grow my heart for the people around me? Help me to see what I haven't seen before. Help grow my heart for the people around me. All right? So that's for those of you that are followers of Jesus. Now let me take 1 second and just talk to those of you who are not followers of Jesus yet. Here's what you need to know. There is not one person in our church who thinks that they are any better than you at all. And if they do, they are wrong. Terribly, terribly wrong. In fact, there are people in our church that have outsinned you 10 to 1. I guarantee you that's true. 10 to 1. In fact, there's some stuff, if you found out about it, you'd be like, I don't even know if I can come here anymore because I don't know if I can be around those people. And some of those people might be on this stage right now. I'm not going to tell you which one of us. Listen, I know you look at that and you're like, I don't like the fact that you called me lost. That's a little insulting. Hey, if something doesn't have value to you, you don't consider it lost. You know what I'm saying? I mean, think about it. Like, where's your high school diploma? You don't really value it, right? But you know where your iPhone is. You know where your wallet is. If that thing was missing, you'd be like, it's lost. Because it matters to you. And you need to know that you matter to God. And He wants you so desperately to go from being a lost person to being a found person, to go from being someone who doesn't have a relationship with God yet, that hasn't stepped across that line, to someone who does. And I'm telling you, making that decision to follow Him is the most important decision you'll ever make in your life. And I would love, as a church, I would love as a pastor to be part of helping you take that step, because that changes everything. It really does. All right? So our location pastor is going to come in just a moment and talk to you more about that. All right? Hey, this series is going to get better and better and better. Next week, we're going to take this thing a step further. All right? Do not miss it. Deal? Let me pray for you. God, thank you for every person here, every person at other locations this morning. Give us the wisdom to know what to do with what we've heard and the courage to do it. In Jesus' name, amen. Love you guys.